Hi everyone. This time we will be talking about deviance, and our exercises this week are all in the study of sociological deviance, which is a very interesting topic. So first off, we're going to talk about what deviance is. Then we'll talk about deviance and crime, and we will talk briefly about control and punishment. Lecture 8.2 talks about sociological theories of deviance. So deviance is any behavior or trait or even belief that departs from a norm and generates a negative reaction in a particular group. In sociology, we do not talk about deviance as either a good thing or a bad thing. It is simply something that is. It's something to be studied. When we define something as deviant, it requires us to examine the group's norms and how the group reacts to that behavior. So um, to study deviance, we need to understand effectively groups and cultures. And if a group or culture thinks something is weird or thinks something is bad, then it is labeled as deviant. If they don't, then they don't label it as deviant. And it is important to note that what is deviant may or may not be a crime. There are plenty of things that are deviant in our society that are not necessarily against the law, even though they might be labeled as weird or different, and people that do them are considered deviant. So what is deviant in one culture may or may not be deviant in another culture. Um, the first woman in the upper left, those rings on her neck, well, it gives the illusion of stretching the neck. What it really does is push the collarbones down. But those brass rings are considered a sign of beauty in her culture. Similarly, the woman on the upper right, she is a woman of high prestige, and we know this because in that culture, her large lip gauges in the upper lip signify high um, status. The guy on the lower left, you will see he has a spliced tongue. There are a number of subcultures in the United States, piercing body modification cultures that see that as a desirable thing, others that see it as a gross thing. And then there was a time, and this is only recently changed, when NBA basketball players could be fined and penalized for not being in uniform because of their sleeve tattoos. This has changed relatively recently, but there was a time when number 7 there could have been fined for his tattoos. So this is just a thought exercise. Um, what is the most deviant thing you've ever done? Just take a second and think about that. What was that thing? We all have that thing that we did that we probably wouldn't let our parents or maybe anyone know about. And think about the ramifications. Did you get caught? Probably didn't. And if you would have got caught, what could have happened to you? Um, if you had got caught. And if you did get caught, did it go worse? Did you get off easy? Um, Chances are, at least if you're watching this, not in a prison, and I don't see how you could because we don't have those kind of programs at University of New Mexico. You didn't get caught. Most people don't get caught. Most people that do deviant things don't get caught. Deviance happens all the time. It's not just criminals that do deviance, but um, yeah, and there's a lot to go with that. If you're more interested in studying criminality and criminal behavior, I definitely suggest taking one of our deviance courses here at University of New Mexico. I've taught a great class on the prison system, but the point I want to drive home here is that deviance happens all the time, and it's who is and who isn't deviant is more dependent on who we label as deviant, which we'll talk about in a moment. Most people have committed a criminal criminally deviant act at one point or another in their lives. Only the people that get caught are labeled as deviant, as I just said. I just put this slide in here to make sure I got the point. So let's talk about deviance and crime. Not all deviance is crime, but a lot of crime is deviance. In the United States, serious crimes are punished by imprisonment. However, this is not the only way that societies have punished people for crimes. Um, some societies use shunning or banishment. These tend to be more effective punishment in pre-agrarian, pre-industrial societies. So either a society that does a lot of farming or a society that lives off the land, because those tend to be harsher environments and you tend to be more dependent on your fellow person. So if you are dependent on other people, you need other people to survive, then shunning them or ignoring them can absolutely be a very big punishment and potentially a death sentence. Similarly to shunning, banishment is another punishment that is used in these types of societies where the person is forced to leave. So not only are they ignored, but they lose all of their stuff. And in pre-modern societies, to be forced to do that, to be forced to walk off into the woods, can be a death sentence. Corporal punishment is another punishment form that we don't use in the United States very much at all anymore, but is used by some societies. This can include whipping, mutilation, or other forms of punishment. Um, these You can make a rationale that corporal punishment is almost easier on offenders, right? So I think if I had the choice of having a couple fingers removed from my left hand and serving a 5-year prison sentence, I would probably choose the fingers off my left hand. However, it's important to keep in mind that corporal punishment is very rarely uniform. Um, the person taking off those fingers wouldn't do it in a surgical way. They'd probably do it with a machete or something, right? And these crimes aren't always punished by legal authority figures. Acid attacks in Africa and the Middle East, where people are accused of committing crimes and have acid thrown at them. Well, just because you're accused of committing a crime doesn't mean you actually did it, right? So a lot of innocent people are often victims of those kinds of attacks. And they might be crimes that us in the Western world don't necessarily think of as being crimes, like women are attacked for doing uh, immodest things, right? Showing too much skin. That happens with acid attacks. Um, so yeah, corporal punishment can be really ugly and really brutal. Just want to drive home. Crimes and punishments change over time. This is a picture from Prohibition. Those guys in the long trench coats and the hats, those are federal agents dumping out alcohol during Prohibition. During that short period of time in the 20th century, it was legal for the government to come in and dump out your alcohol if they find your alcohol. After that time, and even before that time, that same act would be a destruction of property by government officials, and that would be illegal. Uh, Similarly, heroin. Heroin use is now a deviant act. But the Bayer company, that same Bayer aspirin company, they invented heroin. They invented heroin as a less addictive, didn't succeed there, alternative to morphine, right? So heroin was not only a prescription drug, but an over-the-counter drug for the first couple decades of its existence. And now, obviously, it is illegal. So let's talk about control and punishment. There are 4 types of social control. So these types of social control, these are justifications for using prisons or punishing people in other ways. First is deterrence. We punish people, we put people in prison to prevent crimes by threatening to put you in prison. Okay? Now, most people probably agree that crime is kept down by that to a degree. Retribution is another justification for social control. We want revenge for a crime that's been committed. Now, in our society, we don't like to talk about revenge too much or retribution or think of the government as seeking revenge. But when we start talking about the death penalty, then you start hearing some arguments like we need justice for the family members. We need to do that thing to make that these kind of revenge mindsets, right? So we do sometimes think about that. Incapacitation. This is another reason we imprison people. We want to remove them from society to keep them from doing it again. So if you put a rapist in prison, they can't rape anyone else outside of the prison anymore. You could also achieve incapacitation of rapists by castrating them or other means of keeping them from committing sexual acts again. And there have been societies that have entertained those ideas. And then finally, rehabilitation. We don't talk about this much in the United States, but parts of Europe, they certainly do. They talk about reforming criminals so that they can eventually re-enter society. Those societies that place high emphasis on rehabilitation tend to have lower rates of crime because criminals don't re-offend after they're let out for a variety of reasons. They also tend to have much shorter prison sentences. And that is the end of our presentation.